Another episode of Ann's Excellent Adventures, the Honda Pacific Coast, and the Great Big Fight. Let's talk about that. Let's get cracking. Good moto morning, beautiful people. Welcome to Kraken's Garage. I'm your host, Eric, and on today's episode, we're doing another update of Ann's Excellent Adventures. I alluded to the fact that I had several corrupt files. I was able to break the code on this particular video and thread it together to get it enough to publish the video. The quality is not going to be as good as the previous ones, as I'm working with what little I have to work with regarding the files. So there's a very interesting episode, kind of lengthy. It's about a 13-minute video. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you at the end. Let's get to it.
Honda Pacific Coast. It's part of the story of how I ended up taking my first solo trip on the Boxer. We went out for a day ride with the club, and the club went hither and yon, and came up on a creek that had to be forded, and we were way down near Tehachapi and in Southern California, and everybody rode across this creek. It had a concrete bottom where the water poured over this ford, and everybody rode over and got on the other side without any trouble. But I had this brand new Pacific Coast. The ink wasn't even dry on the check yet, and I was extremely nervous about riding it across this concrete. I could see the green algae growing in the water and on the bottom, and I just was convinced that it was slippery, and I was nervous. I didn't want to make the ford, and I was willing to turn around and go home and let the group go on and ride without me. And Flip was over on the other side, and he said I was grandstanding and making a big production out of the fact that I wouldn't ride across this creek. That's, to be argued. But he was pissed, so he walked across the creek in his boots and came on the other side and rode the Honda across to the other side with his boots full of water. And I said, how will I get over there? And he said, you can walk across just like I did and get your boots full of water. And so, big family fight here. So when we got home that night, we were still arguing about this episode at the creek. And he was saying, you were making a big thing out of it, and it was embarrassing with the other people there, and I was mortified and blah, blah, blah. So we all went to bed angry. And the next morning, he went to work. And I got up and I thought, I have something to prove to myself, because I was really bummed out over this thing. So I said, I'm going to take a solo trip. I'm going to go off by myself, and I'm going to do something to show that I can handle anything that comes up, except crossing a creek, maybe. And so I put an extra T-shirt, my rain gear, took my credit card, and put my Beretta automatic in the front pocket of the Eric's laughing.
Well,
in the front.
I have a global audience, so that people aren't used to hearing their mom, who's 90 years old, talking about packing a weapon on a ride. So.
Well, I thought a woman going off by herself ought to have a gun.
I don't disagree, but
yeah. So
welcome to America, folks.
So welcome to America. So I took my Beretta, and Flip had bought it to me for personal protection, and bought it for me for personal protection. So I took off, and I wrote a note, and I said, gone off on a solo trip, don't know where I'm going, don't know how long I'm going to be gone, but I'm coming back, don't worry, and I'll get in touch. So much for that. And I took off. And he got a guilty conscience over the whole fight and decided he was wrong, went out and bought 2 dozen red roses, wrapped them up, came home at 11 o'clock that morning with his roses to apologize and kiss and make up, and I was gone. And I guess it was a bad moment for him. He didn't know where I was, what I was doing, when I was coming back. That was exactly what I wanted to do. So I went up California, over into 395 Bishop, over into Nevada, cut back, ended up over logging roads around Eureka, California, and took a ride one day out around an area that somebody had recommended as being wonderful called Shelter Cove, and therein lies the story. At the end of the day, it had gone down and along the ocean and back through sequoias and back to Eureka, and it was just the most beautiful ride I had ever taken in my life. And I was missing Flip, and I thought, oh, he would love this ride today. So I called him, and I told him I was in Eureka, and I had done this thing, and he should come up there, and I would do the ride again with him. And he said, what'll I do for a bike? And I said, I'll get you a bike. I don't know where, I don't know how, but I'll find one in this burg. So he said, okay. So he called me back, and he said, I've got a flight to McKinleyville on a Delta aircraft, and he said, it better be a good ride. The round trip ticket's $600 from Southern California. And I said, it's a great ride. And he said, have you got a bike for me? And I said, yeah. I went and talked to a tire dealer in town, the Tire Baron in Eureka, and he has a whole bunch of motorcycles, and he said he'd let you have one of them. We should come by, and you should bring your insurance policy copy that you were covered to ride other people's bikes and so on. So that's what we did. I picked him up at McKinleyville, and we rode 2 up on the Weird Harold to the Tire Barons, and he gave him a big 900cc Honda Standard of some kind. And we took off, and we did this Shelter Cove ride, and it was beautiful, and it was wonderful. And I took him back to McKinleyville 2 up, and he got on an airplane, and he went home. And I went on with my trip, but there was peace in the valley. We weren't mad at each other anymore.
That was a doozy of a fight.
That was a doozy of a fight. That's right. I had something to prove to myself, and I wanted to prove to him that he couldn't push me around and bully me. And we both learned something out of the whole experience. But I really enjoyed the independence, and I loved touring and making a trip like that on Weird Boxer. I stayed in the strangest places. I manhandled that motorcycle up on.
Half the fun is the adventure and not knowing where you're going to stop.
I didn't know. I stopped in Mineral, California, and pulled the bike up on a porch of a log cabin where I rented a room. And I ate breakfast sitting around a pot-bellied stove with a bunch of old geezers in the morning, and didn't need my Beretta. And I followed logging trucks up logging roads. The only thing I was afraid of at all was that I was going to drop that bike in some godforsaken place, and I would have to sit there forever until somebody came along who could pick that thing up for me. And I never did really learn to lift a bike and get it vertical. And I knew all the lessons of how to back up to it and lift it from, behind, but I just never, I'm only 5'2". And I couldn't do it, didn't want to attempt it. But that was the first time I really took a long distance trip, and the first time alone, and the first time on Weird Harold. And the bike was very satisfactory. The pockets were not waterproof, and I had a problem with stuff getting wet when it rained, but the saddlebags locked on the back and were hard bags. They were super.
𝕒𝕣𝕒𝕣𝕐 bags.
The 𝕒𝕣𝕒𝕣 bag. Yeah, you remember a lot of these names that I don't. But that.
I'm still in the game of messing with it, so that's the only reason.
Yeah. You remembered kryptonite. I think I would have forgotten that. So I needed to get, this is off on another story now, I needed to get rid of the damn Pacific coast. I didn't like it. Couldn't tell you why. was a perfectly good bike, but I just decided it was ugly, and the whole world thought it was ugly. And they'd gotten to the point where you couldn't give one away. You couldn't put it in the paper and sell it. Nobody wanted the thing. So I thought, Flip wanted a new BMW K bike, K1100, that had just been brought on the market. And it was
the blue one?
the blue silk job, yeah.
That was his last bike.
Last bike. Very, very expensive. I can't remember what its sale price was now, but I got the idea, which worked out okay, that there was a dealer up in Hollywood who sold Hondas and BMWs. Bingo. So I rode the Pacific Coast up there. Flip drove up on his bike, his K. And
He had the K100 LT that he painted like the F-14 Tomcat.
exactly. I'll talk about that if you want. But we said to the dealer, he wants to buy that K1100, but he...
Was it Irv Sieber?
No, this is up in Hollywood.
Okay.
About 80 miles up in LA from where we lived.
Right.
That was the
I'm putting the pieces together.
That was the point of the story, was the distance. So I said, he wants to buy the K, this very expensive bike, and I want to trade the Honda Pacific Coast I have parked out front on that new, very expensive motorcycle. And of course, it really threw the screws to the dealer. He didn't want the damn Pacific Coast, but he wanted to sell that expensive BMW, the worst way to flip. So he gave me a trade-in price on the Pacific Coast that was good enough. And it let me get some money out of it and get rid of it. And when we came to write the contract on the K, I said, I'm going to put it on my American Express card so he can ride it home tonight. And he must have traded his LT at the same time.
I don't know the demise of the F-14 bike.
I don't recall either.
That's a total void on my radar.
Okay, both of us, so forget that. So the dealer says, an express card? And I said, yeah. And he said, this is like $14,000 we're talking about here. And I said, that's all right. American Express had a policy that at any time, you didn't have a credit limit on your card, but at any time you could spend twice the highest charge you'd had previously. So we'd had $7,000 on the card previously. So now, by their policy, we could put $14,000 on the card, no problem. So the dealer called American Express, and they hemmed and they hawed and they picked the lint out of their navel, and they just didn't want to do it. But they didn't have any grounds to say no and refuse me. It was my card. I don't know why I carried it. And finally they said, okay, to the dealer, we'll take it. So he put it on the card and the charge went through and we rode home. I rode 2 up on the back of the new BMW from Hollywood back to Long Beach, and I was rid of the Pacific Coast. American Express called the next day at home. Were we the people who put this charge on the card? Yes, we were. Could he talk to Mr. Johnson? Yes, he could. He did. Then they sent us a letter and said, would Mr. Johnson sign this letter with his signature, like the card, or whatever they wanted. But they wanted him to sign for it and say that he was the one that bought the bike and was responsible for paying back this charge. It was a big hassle, and I got rid of the American Express card after that. I never fiddled with it again, ditched it.
So that wraps up another episode of Ann's Excellent Adventures. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, as we both are sharing our personal life, in Ann's case, her personal life. from a woman that rode for 40 years, that's 90 years old at this time. I hope you look forward to more in the future, and I hope to get more on film in the near future. So thank you for joining us today. We are both very blessed. Peace.